My son's new wife told the whole church potluck I was getting confused in my old age, and for a moment, even my own son looked at me with pity in his eyes. That was the moment Diana started trying to erase me from my own family. Just a few months earlier, my son Tom and my 7-year-old grandson Michael had moved back into my house after a messy divorce. Our little home in Ohio was crowded, but it was safe. It was happy. Then Tom brought Diana home. My name is Mary, and I'm telling you this story because no one believed me until it was almost too late. Diana had the prettiest smile you've ever seen, the kind that made you want to trust her. She would bring me flowers and call me Mum. But when she looked at my grandson Michael, her eyes were as cold as a winter morning. One day, I saw her grab his little arm in the hallway. "We don't tattle in this family, do we, Michael?" she said, her voice like ice. He just looked at the floor and shook his head. She let him go when she heard me coming, and that sweet, fake smile was right back on her face. What did she not want him to tell me? Diana started acting like she was the woman of the house right away. She'd rearrange my kitchen cabinets and say, "Oh, Mary, this is so much more organised for you." She bought new curtains for the living room, ones I didn't like, and told Tom, "Your mother needs a little cheering up, don't you think?" Tom, my dear boy, was so tired from the divorce and so charmed by Diana that he just went along with it. He thought she was a blessing. I tried to talk to him once. "Tom, don't you think she's a little controlling?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed and patted my hand. "Mum, she's just trying to help. Please give her a chance." "For me?" I saw the look in his eyes. He was so desperate for a happy life again that he was willing to ignore anything that felt wrong. So I stayed quiet. But every time Diana smiled at me, I felt a knot in my stomach. I started watching her, noticing how she'd listen in on my phone calls or glance at my mail when she thought I wasn't looking. She was looking for something, but what was it? The real trouble started with the nightmares. One night, a terrible scream echoed from Michael's room. I'm old, but I flew out of my bed faster than I have in years. I ran down the hall to my grandson's room, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got to his door, Diana was already there, standing in the doorway, blocking my path. She put a hand on my chest and said softly, "Shh, Mary. You'll only make it worse. I'll handle it." Michael was sitting up in his bed, sobbing, his little face pale with fear. "But what happened?" I asked, trying to see past her. Diana didn't even turn around. She just stood there, a dark shape in the doorway, and her voice was so calm it was chilling. "Just a bad dream," she said. "Go back to bed. There's nothing to see here." But there was something to see. I saw the look on Michael's face when he looked at her. It wasn't the face of a child who was being comforted. It was the face of a child who was looking at the monster from his nightmare. What had he seen before I got there? The next morning, I made Michael his favourite blueberry pancakes. His little face was still so pale. I knelt beside his chair at the kitchen table. "Michael, sweetie," I said softly, "can you tell Grandma what your bad dream was about?" He opened his mouth to speak, but Diana walked in, smiling that bright, false smile of hers. "Oh, let's not talk about scary things and ruin this lovely morning," she said, placing a glass of orange juice in front of him. "We should only talk about happy things, right, Michael?" My grandson just stared down at his plate, moving the blueberries around with his fork. I looked at Diana, my heart aching with a frustration I couldn't show. "He should be able to talk about what scares him," I said, my voice tight. Diana's smile didn't falter. "And he can," she said, looking right at me. "With me. We had a long talk last night. He's perfectly fine now." She was building a wall between me and my grandson, brick by brick, and I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones that she was telling him what to say and what to keep secret. What poison was she whispering to him when I wasn't there to hear? A few days later, my son Tom sat with me in the living room going over bills. He looked so tired. I tried to reassure him. "Don't you worry about money, Tom," I told him. Your father and I, we saved. There's a good amount set aside for you and Michael. It's all in a trust. You'll never have to worry." Just then, Diana came in with a tray of tea, and I knew she had heard every word. She set the tray down and said, "Oh, Mary, that's so generous of you. Tom is so lucky to have a mother like you." But there was a strange light in her eyes, a hunger that made me deeply uncomfortable. Later that evening, I found her in the hallway, standing near the old filing cabinet where I keep all my important papers: the deed to the house, my late husband's will, the trust documents. She was just looking at it, not touching it, but her focus was so intense it was like she was trying to see through the metal. When she noticed me, she jumped and gave a little laugh. "Silly me, I got lost in thought," she said. But she wasn't just thinking, she was planning. How could I protect my family's future from the greedy look in that woman's eyes? The nightmares kept happening, almost every other night. Soon my bright, happy grandson was gone. In his place was a quiet, nervous little boy who jumped at every loud noise. He stopped playing with his toy cars and wouldn't even watch his favourite cartoons anymore. He just sat in the corner of the living room, sketching in a little notebook he carried with him everywhere. He wouldn't show the drawings to anyone. One afternoon, I heard Diana talking to him in a low voice. "What did I tell you about secrets, Michael?" I heard her say. "What do secrets do?" I held my breath, listening from the kitchen. I heard my grandson's tiny, trembling voice reply, "Secrets keep us safe." My blood ran cold. That wasn't a phrase a 7-year-old makes up on his own. That was something that had been taught to him. It was a rule. It was a threat. My son Tom didn't see the change in his boy. He was too busy working and being blinded by Diana. But I saw it. The monster from Michael's nightmares was very real, and she was living in my house. A few days later, I was folding laundry in the living room. Michael was on the floor trying to show me one of his drawings from his little notebook. He was just about to hand it to me when Diana walked into the room. She didn't say a word to me. She just knelt down beside my grandson. "What are you doing, Michael?" she asked, her voice dangerously sweet. Michael quickly hid the notebook behind his back. "Nothing," he mumbled. Diana put a finger under his chin and made him look at her. "We don't show our secrets to other people, do we?" she whispered. "Secrets are like little birds. If you let them out of their cage, they fly away and get hurt. We have to keep our little birds safe." She stood up and smiled at me as if nothing had happened, leaving Michael frozen on the floor. I felt a cold dread wash over me. She wasn't just telling him to keep secrets anymore. She was teaching him to fear the consequences of telling the truth, and she was making me the enemy, the one he couldn't trust. How do you fight a monster who uses words as her weapon? That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Diana's cold eyes and Michael's frightened face kept replaying in my mind. I got up and walked quietly through the dark house. Something pulled me toward the old filing cabinet in the hall. As I ran my hand over the familiar, cool metal, my fingers brushed against something rough. I flicked on the little hallway lamp. There, around the keyhole of the lock, were several fresh, deep scratches. It looked like someone had tried to force it open with a paperclip or a little knife. My heart began to pound. It was her, Diana. She had actually tried to break into it to get to the trust documents and my will. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't me being a confused old woman. This was real. She was actively trying to steal from my son and grandson. I checked the lock. It was still secure. For now. But I knew she wouldn't give up. Watching and waiting was no longer enough. I had to find a way to prove what she was, but how could I catch a snake when she was so good at hiding in the grass? The scream that tore through the house a few nights later was the worst one yet. It was a sound of pure terror. I didn't hesitate. I threw off my covers and ran for Michael's room. Just like before, Diana was there at the door, a silhouette against the hall light. "Mary, go back to bed," she commanded, her voice firm. "I told you, I will handle this." This time I didn't stop. "Get out of my way," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I had. I pushed past her, my shoulder bumping hers hard. I ignored the flash of shock and anger on her face and rushed to Michael's side. He was shaking, pointing at the dark closet. "She said he lives in there, Grandma," he sobbed. "She said the monster lives in the closet." I pulled him into my arms, holding him tight and rocking him. Over his little head I stared back at Diana, who stood watching us from the doorway. Her sweet smile was gone. In its place was a look of pure, cold hatred. The battle for my grandson had just begun, and she finally knew that I was going to fight her. The next morning, the air in my house was thick and cold. Diana didn't speak to me, didn't even look at me, but she was sweeter than honey to my son, Tom. She made him his coffee just the way he likes it and fussed over his tie before he left for work. As he was walking out the door, I heard her say to him in a low, worried voice, "Tom, darling, I'm getting a little concerned about your mother. She seems so on edge lately. She was up half the night, and I think her worrying is starting to upset Michael." I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter, as I listened to her plant those poisonous seeds. My own son came over and kissed my cheek. "Try to get some rest today, Mum," he said gently. "Don't worry so much." He didn't see the smirk on Diana's face behind his back. The fight in the hallway had only made her smarter. She wasn't going to challenge me directly anymore. Instead, she was going to turn my own son against me by making him believe I was the one who was unstable. How could I fight her when her new weapon was my own son's love for me? That afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. My nerves were so frayed. But I did. "Hello, is this Mrs. Mary?" a kind voice asked. "This is Mrs. Gable, Michael's first-grade teacher." My heart jumped into my throat. "Is Michael all right?" I asked, picturing the worst. "He's physically fine," she said, but her voice was full of concern. "But I'm worried about him, Mary. He's a very sweet boy, but he seems terrified all the time. He won't play with the other children. During art class, he just draws the same thing over and over again. Dark, scary shapes hiding in closets and corners." I sank into a chair, tears welling in my eyes. Finally, someone else saw it. Someone outside this house saw the fear my grandson was living with every single day. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. "He seems to be carrying a heavy burden," Mrs. Gable continued softly. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and his father as soon as possible. Can you come in tomorrow?" This was it, I thought. This was the proof I needed. How could Tom ignore a teacher? That evening I sat Tom down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I held my cup of tea. "The school called," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's about Michael. His teacher is worried, Tom. Very worried." I saw a flicker of real concern in his eyes, and for a second I felt a surge of hope. But then Diana walked in, wiping her hands on an apron. "Oh, what's this about the school?" she asked, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. I explained what the teacher had said. Diana sighed and put a comforting hand on Tom's shoulder. "That poor little thing," she said. "The divorce has been so hard on him. And Mary," she added, turning to me with pitiful eyes. "I know you mean well, but all this tension in the house can't be helping him feel secure." Tom looked from her to me, his face filled with confusion. "I think Tom and I should go to the meeting alone," Diana concluded. "We need to show the teacher a calm, united front." And my son, my dear blinded son, nodded slowly and said, "She's right, Mum. It's probably for the best." I had never felt so alone in my own home. The next day I watched from the living room window as my son Tom and Diana got ready to leave for the school. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. They were going to talk about my grandson, and I, his own grandmother, was forbidden from going. I could just picture it. Diana, with her sweet, concerned voice, telling the teacher that I was an old, anxious woman who was upsetting Michael. She would twist the whole story, and Tom would be too confused to stop her. I sat there for a minute, feeling helpless and small. Then a fire started burning in my soul. No, I would not let her do this. I would not let her speak for my grandson. I am his family. I grabbed my purse and my car keys from the hook by the door. I didn't know what I would say when I got there, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to be in that room. Diana could try to shut me out of my own home, but she would not shut me out of this. I was going to that school to fight for Michael, and heaven help anyone who tried to stand in my way. I walked into the little elementary school, my heart pounding with every step. I found Michael's classroom and pushed the door open without knocking. Tom, Diana, and the teacher, Mrs. Gable, were all sitting at a small round table. They looked up, their faces a mixture of shock and surprise. Diana's eyes flashed with pure fury. "Mum, what are you doing here?" Tom asked, his voice strained. Before I could answer, Mrs. Gable gave me a small, kind smile and pulled an empty chair up to the table. "Please join us," she said. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mrs. Gable didn't waste any time. She explained Michael's fear, his silence. Then she slid a piece of paper across the table. "He drew this yesterday," she said. I looked down. It was a drawing of a little boy cowering in a corner. Over him stood a giant, dark shape of a woman with a terrible, angry face, and around the monster's neck was a crudely drawn but unmistakable shape, the crescent moon pendant that Diana wore every single day. My son Tom stared at that necklace in the drawing, and his face went completely white. The room was dead silent. Tom couldn't take his eyes off the drawing of the necklace. He knew that necklace. He had given it to Diana himself. Mrs. Gable, the teacher, pointed a gentle finger to the bottom of the page, where a few shaky words were written in crayon. "And this is what he wrote underneath," she said, her voice soft. "It says, 'The monster says secrets keep us safe.'" Diana let out a short, nervous laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh my," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Kids have such wild imaginations. It's a scary world." But her smile was brittle, and her hands were clenched into fists on the table. My own voice came out, stronger than I expected. "That's not his imagination," I said, looking right at Diana. "Those are your words. I've heard you say that to him myself more than once." Tom's head snapped up. He looked at me, then at Diana, then back at the chilling drawing in his hand. For the first time, the wall of lies Diana had built around him began to crack. He was finally seeing the monster, and she was sitting right next to him. I drove home from the school alone, but I imagined the heavy silence in Tom's car. What could Diana possibly say to him now? How could she explain away that necklace drawn around the neck of a monster? When I walked into my house, they were both standing in the living room like statues. The air was buzzing with unspoken words. Diana was trying to act normal, straightening a picture on the wall, but her hands were shaking. My son, Tom, was just staring at her, really staring at her for the first time. He wasn't looking at the beautiful woman he was planning to marry. He was looking at a stranger. He saw the way she refused to look him in the eye. He saw the tight, angry line of her mouth. The charming mask she wore had been cracked, and he was finally seeing the ugliness underneath. She tried to speak, to smile, to smooth things over. "Well, that was a waste of time," she said with a weak laugh. Tom didn't answer her. He just turned and looked at me, his eyes full of pain and confusion. "Mum," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "what is really going on in this house?" Before I could answer, Tom walked past me and down the hall to Michael's room. Diana started to follow him. "Tom, honey, let me come with you. I can help," she said, reaching for his arm. Tom pulled away from her touch. "No," he said, his voice firm. "Stay here." It was the first time I had ever seen him stand up to her. I stood in the hallway, my heart aching as I listened. I heard Tom's gentle voice. "Mikey," he said, "your teacher showed me a drawing today. Can you tell me about the monster buddy?" There was a long silence, and then I heard my grandson's little voice choked with tears. "I can't, Daddy. It's a secret." "It's okay," Tom pleaded. "You can tell me anything." But Michael just started to sob, repeating the same words over and over. "Secrets keep us safe. Secrets keep us safe." Tom came out of the room a few minutes later, his face pale and his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had just walked into the wall of fear that Diana had built around his own son. He looked Diana right in the eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Is my son so afraid to talk to me?" That was when Diana showed her true colours. She didn't have a good answer, so she attacked. Tears streamed down her face as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is your mother's fault," she cried to Tom. "She's been filling his head with stories, making him anxious. She's trying to ruin us because she's jealous." She sobbed and wailed, playing the victim better than any actress on television. And my son, who was so hurt and confused, started to doubt again. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to believe her. He wanted this all to be a simple misunderstanding. I watched him waver, and I felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my heart. A drawing could be dismissed. A child's words could be twisted. My own words could be painted as the ramblings of a jealous old woman. I needed more. I needed proof that was cold, hard, and undeniable. I needed to show Tom, not just tell him. I needed to see exactly what Diana did in that room in the middle of the night. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to catch the monster on camera. The next morning, the silence in the house was a weapon. Diana watched my every move, her eyes following me from the kitchen to the living room. She was making sure I didn't get another moment alone with Tom. I knew if I just walked out the door, she would find a reason to follow me or demand to know where I was going. I had to be clever. I went to the phone in the kitchen and dialed my old friend Betty from church. I made my voice loud and cheerful, a performance for the audience of one in the next room. "Betty, it's Mary," I said. "That craft fair at the community centre is today, isn't it? Oh, I'd love to go. Can you pick me up in an hour?" I listened to Betty's confused reply for a moment before saying, "Wonderful! I'll be ready out front." I hung up the phone. Diana poked her head around the corner, a suspicious look on her face. "Craft fair?" she asked. "Yes, dear," I said, smiling sweetly. "Just us old ladies, buying yarn and knickknacks. I'm sure you'd be bored to tears." I went to my room to get my coat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel her watching me, wondering if I was telling the truth. I didn't go to the craft fair. I had Betty drop me off at the corner, and from there I took a bus to the big electronics store across town. The inside was bright and loud, filled with giant televisions and gadgets I didn't understand. I felt like a spy on a secret mission. I found a young man working there and tried to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me," I said. "My grandson has been having nightmares. I wanted to get a little camera for his room just to make sure he's safe at night, something you wouldn't really notice." The young man showed me a few options, but my eyes landed on a small brown teddy bear with a shiny black nose. He explained the camera's lens was hidden right in the bear's nose. It was perfect. It was something a grandmother would buy. "I'll take it," I said, pulling cash from my purse so there would be no credit card record. I walked out of that store with the bear in a plain shopping bag. It felt heavier than it should, not because of its weight, but because of the weight of the truth I hoped it would capture. This little bear was my only hope. Getting the bear back into the house was the hardest part. I stopped at a dollar store and bought a few cheap ceramic birds to make my story about the craft fair believable. When I got home, Diana was waiting. "Find anything good?" she asked, eyeing my bags. I showed her the ceramic birds. "Just these little dust collectors," I said with a laugh. "Oh, and I got this for Michael." I pulled out the teddy bear. "Isn't he sweet?" Her eyes narrowed for just a second, searching for something, but then she smiled her fake smile. "How nice of you," she said. I waited for my chance. It came an hour later when Diana was in the backyard, taking a long phone call. My hand shook as I crept into Michael's room. I took the old worn bear from his bookshelf and put the new one in its place. I aimed the little black nose so it could see his bed and the doorway perfectly. I whispered a quick prayer, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm. I walked out of the room, leaving my silent little soldier on the shelf, ready to stand guard. Tonight the trap was set. Tonight I would finally see what the monster did when the rest of the world was asleep. That night I lay in my bed, but I did not sleep. Every creak of the old house made my heart jump into my throat. Was that a floorboard groaning under Diana's weight? Was that the whisper of her hand on the hallway wall? I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, praying with every fibre of my being. Please let it work, I whispered to my late husband George, as if he could hear me. Please, help me protect our boy. I imagined my grandson sleeping in his room, so small and innocent, with that little bear watching over him from the shelf. I felt a terrible guilt for not being able to protect him myself, but also a sliver of hope that this was my chance. The hours crawled by, each minute feeling like a lifetime. I heard the furnace kick on, the house groaning as it settled. I heard every car that passed on our quiet street. Finally, through a crack in my curtains, I saw the first pale grey light of dawn. The long, terrible night was over. Now came the even harder part, waiting to see what secrets it had revealed. The next morning at breakfast, I could barely swallow my toast. I had to pretend everything was normal, smiling and passing the butter while my insides were twisted into a tight, anxious knot. Diana seemed cheerful, talking about her plans to go to the gym. I watched the clock on the wall, each tick a slow torture. Finally, Tom left for work, and a few minutes later, Diana grabbed her bag and headed out the door. "I'll be back after lunch," she called out. The second I heard her car pull away, I flew into action. I hurried to Michael's room, my old hands fumbling as I pulled the tiny memory card from the back of the teddy bear. I rushed to my own room and locked the door behind me. I slid the card into the side of my laptop, my breath held tight in my chest. The computer whirred and clicked, taking its sweet time. A little bar on the screen showed the video file loading, moving slower than a snail. Every second of waiting was agony. What would I see? What if it saw nothing? What if she knew about it? The video file finally opened. The screen showed a grainy black and white view of Michael's room. I saw him sleeping, just a little lump under the covers. I watched, fast-forwarding through hours of him just tossing and turning. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. A part of me started to feel a strange sense of relief, mixed with disappointment. Maybe nothing happened last night. Maybe I really was just an old woman making things up in her head. I was about to close the file when I saw the timestamp in the corner of the screen. 2:13 a.m. My hand froze on the mouse. I watched, my eyes glued to the screen, as the doorknob in the video slowly began to turn. The door creaked open, just a sliver at first, and then a dark figure slipped inside, silent as a ghost. The figure stood there for a long moment, just watching my grandson sleep. It was her. It was Diana. I clapped my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. My worst fears were true, and the proof was right here, playing out on my computer screen. I watched the video, my hand clamped over my mouth, my old heart feeling like it would beat right out of my chest. On the screen, Diana stood over my grandson's bed, a dark shadow in the grainy black and white. I was so scared she was going to reach out and touch him, to hurt him. I think I stopped breathing, but she didn't. After a long moment, she turned away from his bed and crept silently across the wooden floor. She wasn't moving toward the door to leave. She was moving toward the far corner of the room, toward the old cedar chest my husband George made for me years ago. It's where I keep the old photo albums, the baby blankets, and deep at the bottom, our most important family papers. She knelt in front of it, her back to the camera. I felt a cold wave of understanding wash over me. The fear she put into Michael, the nightmares. That wasn't the whole story. It was a distraction. It was a cover for her real reason for being in that room. She wasn't just a monster. She was a thief. My eyes were glued to the laptop screen. I watched as Diana pulled something small and shiny from the pocket of her robe. It looked like a nail file. She worked it into the old simple lock on the cedar chest. After a few seconds, I saw the lid pop open. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. She didn't even glance at the photo albums or the little shoes I saved from when Tom was a baby. She dug right down to the very bottom and pulled out a thick, worn file folder. I knew that folder. It had my husband's neat handwriting on the tab. Family Trust Will. She opened it up and pulled out her phone, using its little light to read the pages. I could see the faint glow on her face. She wasn't just reading. She was taking pictures of every single page, one after another. Pictures of the trust I had set up for my son and grandson. Pictures of my will. She was planning something terrible. And the look on her face, lit up by that little screen, was one of pure, greedy satisfaction. She thought she was getting away with everything. Just as Diana was sliding the folder back into the chest, a small sound came from the bed. On the screen, I saw Michael whimper in his sleep and turn over. Diana froze instantly, like a frightened deer. She shoved the folder back in, slammed the lid shut and spun around to face the bed. She stood perfectly still, waiting to see if he would wake up. I leaned closer to my laptop, my ear next to the little speaker. The camera's microphone was better than I thought. I heard Diana's voice, no longer sweet, but a low, menacing hiss that cut through the silence of the room. "The monster is watching," she whispered. "He hates little boys who make noise. He lives in the closet, and if you wake him up, he'll come out." Michael whimpered again, and she took a step closer. "You must be quiet. You must keep all our secrets," she hissed. "If you ever tell anyone you saw me, the monster will get you." I finally had it. The proof, the theft and the terror all recorded. I had the whole ugly truth on this little memory card, and she had no idea. I sat there in the quiet of my bedroom, staring at the laptop screen long after the video had ended. The image of Diana whispering her poison to my grandson was burned into my mind. I felt a wave of nausea, but underneath it was something else. A cold, hard strength. The game was over. I had her. My first thought was to protect the evidence. I don't know much about computers, but I know you can make copies. I found a little thumb drive in my desk drawer and, with shaking hands, I figured out how to copy the video file onto it. I must have checked it 3 times to make sure it was there. Then I took that little piece of plastic and metal, my secret weapon, and hid it at the very bottom of my sewing basket, underneath years of old thread and buttons. No one would ever find it there. I put the memory card back in the teddy bear, just in case. I felt like I was hiding a loaded bomb in my own house. The quiet ticking was the sound of Diana's time running out. Now, I just had to decide when and where it would finally go off. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, but it was a daze of horrible clarity. Everything started to make a terrible kind of sense. Every time Diana had said, "Mary, don't you think you're overreacting?" Or, "Tom, your mother seems so confused lately," it hadn't just been an insult. It was a strategy. She was deliberately trying to make my own son believe I was losing my mind, so that when I finally saw her for what she was, no one would believe me. She was isolating me, pushing me out of my own family from the inside. She wanted my son, my grandson, and the money my husband and I had worked our whole lives for. And her plan was to get rid of me by turning me into a crazy old woman in everyone's eyes. It was the cruelest, most calculated thing I had ever known. I wasn't just fighting a thief who wanted my money. I was fighting a snake who wanted to steal my entire life, my entire family, and then convince them all that it was for their own good. As the sun began to set, all the fear and sorrow I had been feeling finally burned away, leaving only a cold, protective rage. The scared old woman was gone. A grandmother protecting her family was in her place. I knew I couldn't just walk up to my son Tom and show him the video. If I did it in private, Diana would launch into her Academy Award performance. She would cry, she would scream, she would twist the story until Tom's head was spinning and he didn't know who to believe. No, that wouldn't work. The truth had to come out in a way she couldn't escape. He couldn't just hear the monster's voice. He had to see the monster's face when she was exposed, when all her lies fell apart, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. My mind started working, thinking of a time and a place. It had to be perfect. It had to be final. A plan began to form, a risky and theatrical one, but it was the only way. Diana loved being the centre of attention. Soon she would be. My son Tom had just bought a brand new television for the living room. It was one of those big, smart ones that you can connect a laptop to. He was so proud of it. He and Diana would sit on the couch and watch their shows every evening. As I watched them one night, the final piece of my plan clicked into place. A family dinner. A special one. Tom's birthday was in a couple of weeks, but I would say I wanted to celebrate it early. I would cook his favourite meal, pot roast and mashed potatoes. I would set the table with the good china. I would create the perfect picture of a happy, peaceful family. And then, for dessert, I would suggest we all look at a special family slideshow on the big new TV to celebrate Tom. I would gather all the old photos of him as a little boy, and hidden among those sweet, innocent pictures on my little thumb drive would be the one video file that would burn Diana's world to the ground. She loved to be the centre of attention, the star of the show. Well, I decided she was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The next morning, I took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen where Tom and Diana were having coffee. I put on my best performance of a tired, regretful old woman. "Tom, Diana," I began, my voice quiet. "I need to apologise. I've been difficult lately. This house has been full of tension, and I know that I am part of the reason why." Tom looked relieved. Diana just watched me, her eyes narrowed, trying to see the angle. "I'm sorry," I continued, looking right at her. "I was wrong to doubt you. I want us to be a family. To make it up to you both, I'd like to cook a special early birthday dinner for Tom this Sunday." My son's face lit up with a huge smile. "Mum, that's great. Of course." Diana's smug, triumphant smile was all the answer I needed. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me and turned my son against me. "I would love that, Mary," she said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. "A fresh start." She had no idea she wasn't agreeing to a fresh start. She was agreeing to the end. The next 2 days were the most difficult of my entire life. I had to live under the same roof as that woman, pretending everything was forgiven. I smiled at her. I asked her opinion on what tablecloth to use for the dinner. We passed each other in the hallway and she would say, "Isn't it wonderful how well we're all getting along now?" And I would have to nod and agree. All the while, the secret video on the thumb drive felt like a hot coal hidden in my sewing basket. Every time I looked at my grandson Michael, with his sad, quiet eyes, my resolve hardened. He was still living in fear, and I was the only one who could save him. I had to hold on for 2 more days. I had to play my part perfectly. On Saturday night, I lay in my bed, the house still and dark around me. I listened to the quiet breathing of my family. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that by this time tomorrow night everything would be different. My family would either be free, or it would be shattered into a million pieces. Sunday arrived, bright and clear. I spent the morning in the kitchen, the familiar weight of my apron a small comfort. I peeled potatoes, chopped carrots, and browned the pot roast, filling the house with the warm, comforting smells of a family meal. Diana came in, acting the part of the perfect, helpful daughter-in-law. "Can I do anything, Mary?" she asked with a smile. "You can set the table with the good dishes," I told her, my voice even. While she was busy in the dining room, I slipped away to my bedroom. I took the thumb drive from my sewing basket and plugged it into my laptop. I created a new folder on the screen. One by one, I dragged in old pictures of Tom, as a chubby baby, on his first day of school, at his high school graduation. Then, I dragged in the last file, the one labelled video. I named it A Special Memory. I closed the laptop, my hands steady. The stage was set. All the actors were in their places. They just didn't know the play was about to turn into a tragedy. That evening, we all sat around the dining room table. It looked like a picture from a magazine. The table was set perfectly, the food was delicious, and the conversation was light. Tom was happier than I had seen him in months, believing the fighting was finally over. Diana was glowing, telling charming stories and laughing at all of Tom's jokes. She was the queen of her new little kingdom, and I was just the quiet, smiling old woman in the corner. My grandson, Michael, was the only one who didn't play a part. He just sat there, silently pushing his food around his plate. I watched them all over the rim of my water glass, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I was a stranger at my own table, a general watching the battlefield right before the attack. When dinner was over, Diana leaned back in her chair and sighed contentedly. "Mary, that was the best pot roast I've ever had," she said. I gave her a small smile. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it," I replied. "But the night isn't over. I have one more surprise for the birthday boy." All eyes turned to me. "A surprise?" Tom asked, intrigued. "What is it?" I stood up from the table and gestured toward the living room. "I dug out all your old baby photos," I said, my voice full of fake nostalgia. "I thought we could look at them on your big new TV, a little trip down memory lane for your birthday." Tom's face broke into a huge grin. "Mum, that's a great idea," he said. Diana thought it was a wonderful, sentimental idea, another perfect family moment for her to star in. She had no idea she was walking right into my trap. They all got up and settled onto the couches in the living room, facing the giant dark screen. I picked up my laptop from the side table and walked over to the television. My hands were perfectly steady. I plugged the little cable from the laptop into the back of the TV. The click of the plastic connector echoed in the quiet room. To me, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. The show was about to begin. I clicked the first file. The huge television screen lit up, showing a picture of my Tom as a chubby baby in the bathtub. He laughed out loud. "Oh, look at you," Diana cooed, snuggling up next to him on the couch. She was loving this. Picture after picture flashed on the screen. Tom on his first bicycle, Tom with a missing front tooth, Tom in his goofy prom tuxedo. He was happy and relaxed, lost in the memories. Diana was eating it up, playing the part of the perfect, loving partner. I kept clicking through the photos, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I let them get comfortable in the warm glow of the past. I let Diana believe she was the star of this happy family movie. After the last picture of his college graduation faded, I turned to him. "I have one last special memory for you, honey," I said, my voice soft. I moved the mouse over to the file named A Special Memory. The screen went black for just a second, and in that moment of darkness, I clicked play. The grainy black and white image of Michael's bedroom filled the 60-inch screen. Tom sat up straight, his smile vanishing. "Mum, what is this?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. On the couch, Diana went completely still, her face drained of all its colour. Neither of them said a word as they watched the silent movie play out. They saw the bedroom door creak open. They saw Diana's shadowy figure slip inside. They watched her creep over to the old cedar chest. "What is she doing?" Tom whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then they saw her pry it open and pull out the file folder with his grandfather's handwriting on it. They saw her take out her phone and begin to photograph the pages of my will. Diana started to stammer, her voice a panicked squeak. "Tom, that's not what it looks like. I can explain." But my son didn't even look at her. He was completely frozen, his eyes glued to the giant screen that was showing him the ugly, undeniable truth about the woman he loved. Before Diana could invent a lie, the sound from the video suddenly filled the living room. It was the sound of my grandson, Michael, whimpering in his sleep. On the giant screen, everyone saw the on-screen Diana freeze and turn toward the little bed. Tom flinched. And then, her voice, her own voice, but a version Tom had never heard, slithered out of the television's speakers, cold and cruel and full of menace. "The monster is watching," her recorded voice hissed. "He lives in the closet, and if you wake him up, he'll come out. If you ever tell anyone you saw me, the monster will get you." The video ended, and the screen went black, leaving the room in a thick, horrified silence. I watched my son. He turned his head, very slowly, away from the blank screen to look at the real Diana sitting next to him. The beautiful, charming woman he loved was gone. All he could see was the monster. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and then he spoke her name, his voice dangerously quiet. "Diana." When Diana heard her name, she jumped up from the couch. The panic in her eyes was wild. "Tom, listen to me!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "This is a trick! Your mother set me up. She hates me. She's always hated me. She probably faked that whole video." She was talking so fast, her words stumbling over each other, but the lies were weak and desperate. My son Tom didn't even flinch. He just looked at her with cold, empty eyes. When she saw that her lies weren't working, she switched to anger. "How dare you!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You believe this crazy old woman over me?" When that didn't work, she finally crumbled. She fell to her knees on the floor and burst into pathetic, sobbing tears. "Please, Tom," she begged, crawling toward him. "I love you. I was just so worried about our future, about the money. Please don't do this." But I could see, and I knew Tom could see, that her tears weren't for him. They were for herself. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was only sorry that she got caught. My son stood up from the couch. He looked down at the weeping woman on the floor, and his face was like a mask carved from stone. There was no anger, no sadness, just a terrible final emptiness. His voice, when he spoke, was so quiet it was scarier than any shout. "You hurt my son," he said, each word a separate, sharp stone. "You took my little boy, who was already hurting from the divorce, and you filled his head with fear. You made him terrified of his own bedroom. You made him afraid to talk to his own father." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "You did that to a child for money." He didn't wait for her to answer. He simply walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cold night air rush into the house. He stood by the open door and looked back at her. "Get your things," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Pack a bag and get out of my mother's house. I never, ever want to see your face again." Diana stared at the open door as if she couldn't understand. It was finally over. There were no more lies she could tell. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the guest room, slamming the door behind her. A few minutes later she came out, dragging a small suitcase, her face ugly with tears and hatred. She wouldn't look at Tom, but she shot me a look of pure poison as she passed. Then the front door slammed shut so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. We heard the squeal of her tires as she sped away down the street, vanishing from our lives forever. A deep, heavy silence fell over the house. In the quiet, I saw my grandson, Michael, standing in the hallway, his little eyes wide. Tom went to him and knelt, pulling him into the tightest hug I have ever seen. "The monster's gone, buddy," he whispered into his son's hair. "She's never coming back. You're safe." Then my son stood up and turned to me, his own eyes full of tears. "Mum," he said, his voice breaking. "You tried to tell me. I am so sorry I didn't listen." I wrapped my arms around my son and held him tight as he cried. All the pain and confusion of the last few months came pouring out of him. "I'm so stupid, Mom," he sobbed into my shoulder. "She was right in front of me and I couldn't see it." I just stroked his back and let him talk. "She fooled me too at first, honey," I said softly. That kind of evil is clever. It knows how to wear a beautiful mask. We stood there in the quiet living room for a long time, the only light coming from the blank television screen that had shown us the truth. The battle was over. Our family had a deep wound, but the poison was finally out. I looked over at my grandson, Michael, who was watching us from the hallway, his little face full of questions. Tom saw him too and knelt, holding out a hand. "Come here, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Michael ran to him, and Tom wrapped him up in his arms. We were broken, the three of us, but we were together. And I knew in that moment that we would find a way to heal. That night, the house felt different. The air was lighter. The silence wasn't heavy with secrets anymore. It was peaceful. Before I went to bed, I peeked into Michael's room. The little lamp on his nightstand was on, and my son, Tom, was sitting in the rocking chair in the corner, just watching his boy sleep. He didn't want to leave his side. I went to my own bed and slept deeper than I had in months, a heavy weight finally lifted from my soul. The next morning I came downstairs to find Tom already in the kitchen, a look of pure relief on his tired face. "He slept through the whole night, Mum," he said, his voice full of wonder. For the first time in months there were no nightmares, not one. Later that day, I saw Michael in the living room, playing with his old toy cars for the first time in forever. He was making little vroom vroom sounds. It was such a small thing, but to me it sounded like the most beautiful music in the world. The monster was gone, and my little grandson was finally starting to come back to us. Tom was a different man after that night. The fog he had been in was completely gone. The next weekend, he went through the entire house like a storm. He gathered up everything Diana had ever given us or left behind. The ugly curtains in the living room, the little trinkets on the shelves, a few of her books. He put it all into a big cardboard box. "I want her gone," he said, his jaw set. "I want every memory of her out of this house." As he was clearing out a drawer in the guest room, he found the silver crescent moon necklace he had given her. He just stared at it in the palm of his hand for a long moment, a final reminder of her lies. Then he dropped it into the box with all the other junk. Later, he sat down with me at the kitchen table. "I made an appointment for Michael to talk to a counsellor," he said quietly. "A good one. He needs to know none of this was his fault. He needs to know he can tell his dad anything." I looked at my son, and my heart filled with pride. The real Tom was back. A week later, Tom took Michael to his first appointment with the child counsellor, a kind woman named Dr. Evans. I waited at home, my hands busy knitting a scarf but my mind a million miles away. When Tom came home a few hours later, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling. "How did it go?" I asked, my heart in my throat. "It was good, Mom," he said, sinking into the armchair. "Dr. Evans didn't even ask him about the nightmares. She just gave him some paper and crayons and let him draw." Tom pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to me. I opened it. It was a drawing of our little house. There was a big yellow sun in the sky, and standing in the front yard were 3 smiling stick figures, a tall one for Tom, a little one for Michael, and one with scribbled grey hair for me. The monster was nowhere in sight. "He told her about the drawing," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "He pointed to you, and he said, 'Grandma made the monster go away. We're safe now.'" With the immediate storm over, we had to deal with the wreckage. One afternoon, Tom and I sat at the kitchen table with the folder of legal papers from the cedar chest. "We need to make sure she can never touch this," he said, his voice firm. "Never." The next day we met with our old family lawyer, Mr. Henderson. We didn't tell him the whole ugly story, only that there had been a threat to our family's assets. He looked over my husband's will and the trust documents. "Everything is ironclad, Mary," he assured me. "No one can touch this trust without Tom's signature, and even then, it's for Michael's benefit. You and George set this up perfectly." a wave of relief washed over me. The legacy my husband and I had built for our family was secure. As we were leaving, Tom paused at the door. "Just in case," he said to the lawyer, "how do we get a restraining order?" The threat of Diana was finally and completely being erased from our lives, page by page, law by law. Months passed. Autumn came, and the leaves on the big maple tree in my front yard turned to gold and red. The chill in the air felt clean and new. One Saturday afternoon, the three of us were in the living room. Tom was helping Michael build a complicated castle out of blocks on the floor. I was in my favourite armchair, knitting and just watching them. Michael let out a huge, happy belly laugh as his tower of blocks crashed to the ground. Tom laughed with him. It was a simple, perfect sound. The quiet fear that had lived in our house for so long was gone, replaced by the easy warmth of family. I looked at my son and my grandson and my heart felt full to bursting. We had been through a terrible storm, one that had almost torn us apart. But we had survived. I learned that the love in a family is a fierce and powerful thing. It can be tested and it can be tricked, but if you hold on tight, it can shine a light so bright it will chase away even the very worst monsters. Life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. The seasons changed. Michael started second grade and came home with gold stars on his homework. Tom started smiling again, a real smile that reached his eyes. Our little house was a quiet harbour, safe and calm. But sometimes in the dead of night I would lie awake and think about Diana. I didn't think about her with fear or anger anymore, but with a strange, unsettling curiosity. Where did that kind of coldness come from? Was a person just born with a hole in their heart where the goodness was supposed to be? Or was it something that was learned? I thought about her parents, who I had met a few times. They always seemed so normal. But then I would remember the way Diana's mask would slip, the flash of greed in her eyes, the practiced way she could lie and twist reality. It was a skill, honed and perfected. I had always assumed that the evil that visited our family was a stranger. But I started to wonder, was it possible that this darkness had roots? And had I just never thought to look for them before? One rainy Saturday I decided to finally clean out the little closet at the top of the stairs. It was full of things I hadn't touched in years, boxes of old memories gathering dust. At the very back, tucked under a stack of my late husband's sweaters, was a small, sealed cardboard box. On the side, in my own handwriting from long ago, it said, "Mom's Things." After my own mother had passed away, I had packed up her most personal belongings, her letters, a few pieces of jewellery, her diaries, and I had put them away, the grief too fresh to look through them. It had been over 20 years. Now, feeling a sudden need to connect with her, I wiped the dust off the box and carried it to my bedroom. I sat on my bed and carefully cut the old tape. The smell of old paper and faint perfume filled the air. Inside were stacks of letters tied with ribbon and, at the bottom, 2 little black books with worn leather covers. My mother's diaries. I picked one up, its familiar weight a comfort in my hands, and decided to read her story. I spent the rest of the afternoon lost in my mother's world. I read about her school days, her first date with my father, the joy she felt when I was born. It was beautiful and simple. I was smiling as I turned the pages of the second diary from when I was a teenager. Then I found an entry that made the hair on my arms stand up. My mother wrote about her older sister, my Aunt Catherine. "Catherine told father that I was being hysterical again," my mother wrote. "She has a way of twisting my words until I feel like I'm the one who is crazy. She said I was just being emotional and trying to cause trouble for the family, but I know what I saw. I saw her take the money from his wallet and she just smiled at me when he took her side." My breath caught in my throat. It was the same pattern, the same lies, the same way of making the victim feel like they were the problem. I read the last line of the entry, and a chill went straight through my soul. "Sometimes," my mother had written, "I think there is a monster in this family, and it just wears a different face in each generation." I sat on my bed, the little black diary open in my lap, and read the sentence again. Sometimes I think there is a monster in this family, and it just wears a different face in each generation. A shiver went through me that had nothing to do with the rainy day outside. It was a shock of recognition. The words my mother had written more than 50 years ago described the exact feeling I had about Diana. The way she twisted things, the way she made you feel like you were the one going crazy, the way she smiled while she was hurting you. I always remembered my Aunt Catherine as a stern, proper woman who never seemed very happy. But I never imagined she was cruel. I thought of my own mother, who I remembered as being so gentle and sometimes a little sad. Did she carry this secret her whole life? Did she feel as alone as I had felt when no one would believe me? The diary in my hands no longer felt like just a book. It felt like a message sent across time, from one woman who fought a monster to another. I had to know more. I turned the page. I kept reading, my heart growing heavier with every entry. The story came out in little pieces. One entry described how Aunt Catherine had borrowed their mother's favourite brooch to wear to a party. When my grandmother asked for it back, Catherine claimed it had been a gift and made my sweet mother look like a liar for questioning it. Another entry, years later, talked about how Catherine had told my father that my mother was a nervous and fragile woman who shouldn't be bothered with financial matters. It was a lifelong pattern of small, secret cruelties, little thefts, quiet lies, and a constant effort to isolate my mother and make her doubt her own mind. It was the exact same game Diana had played, just in a different time and a different house. The monster wasn't just similar, it was the same monster, using the same tricks. Then, near the end of the diary, I found a name. My mother had written, "Had a lovely call with Eleanor today. She is the only one who ever really sees Catherine for who she is. I am so lucky to have her." Eleanor, my mother's cousin. I closed my eyes and tried to picture her. I remembered a kind woman with a loud, happy laugh from family picnics when I was a little girl. She had to be in her late 80s by now. I hadn't seen her in at least a decade, but I remembered hearing she was living in a retirement community over in Northwood. The diary could only tell me what my mother had felt. It couldn't tell me why. Why was my Aunt Catherine so cruel? Why had this poison been passed down through our family? Eleanor was the only other person in the world who might have the answers. She was the one who had seen it all. I felt a new sense of purpose rise up in me. My own battle was over, but this older, deeper war was still a mystery. I knew what I had to do. I had to find cousin Eleanor. I had to sit down with her and ask her to tell me the story of the monster my mother knew. I had to understand where it all began. The next morning I felt a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. Finding my cousin Eleanor was all I could think about. I dug through the bottom of my closet and found my old address book, the pages worn and soft. Her last known address was over 15 years old. I knew that wouldn't help. I sat down at my laptop, the one that had shown me the truth about Diana, and I carefully typed Northwood Senior Living into the search bar. The website popped up with pictures of smiling seniors and a phone number. My hand trembled a little as I dialed. A cheerful voice answered. "Good morning, Northwood Senior Living." I took a breath. "Hello," I said. "I'm trying to reach one of your residents. Her name is Eleanor Vance. She's my cousin." I held my breath as the woman typed on her computer. "One moment, please," she said. It felt like an eternity. "Yes," the voice finally returned. "Eleanor is here with us. She's in room 214. A wave of relief so strong it made me dizzy washed over me. She was real. She was there. I was one step closer to the truth. That evening, I knew I couldn't keep this journey a secret from my son. Our family had been nearly destroyed by secrets, and I wouldn't make the same mistake. I sat Tom down at the kitchen table after Michael was in bed. "I found something," I said, and I told him everything. I told him about my mother's diary, about Aunt Catherine, and the chilling similarities to Diana. I told him about finding Eleanor's name. He listened patiently, his face serious and thoughtful. He didn't tell me I was crazy. He didn't tell me to leave the past alone. When I was finished, he just nodded slowly. "Wow, Mum," he said quietly. "That's a lot to take in." He was silent for a moment, and then he looked at me, his eyes full of a new protective strength. "You shouldn't go alone," he said. "I'll drive you. We'll go this weekend. We'll find out the truth together." In his voice, I heard the promise that I would never have to fight one of our family's monsters by myself ever again. That Saturday, the air was crisp and cool, filled with the scent of autumn leaves. Tom drove, and I sat in the passenger seat, watching the small towns of Ohio roll by. We didn't talk much about what we were going to find. Instead, we talked about Michael's new friends at school and whether we should get a pumpkin to carve for the front porch. It felt normal. It felt safe. After about an hour, Tom slowed the car and turned down a quiet street lined with old oak trees. He pulled up in front of a long, clean brick building with a sign near the road that read, "Northwood Senior Living." We were here. We both sat in the car for a moment, the engine off, just looking at the building. It looked peaceful, with rocking chairs on the front porch and big windows that shined in the afternoon sun. But I knew that inside those quiet walls were the answers to a dark family secret that had been buried for more than 50 years. I took a deep breath. It was time to finally dig it up. Tom and I walked down the long, quiet hallway, our footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. We found room 214, and I knocked gently on the door. It opened, and a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and bright, curious eyes looked up at us from a wheelchair. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Eleanor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's me, Mary, your cousin." Her eyes widened, and a huge, wonderful smile spread across her face. "Little Mary," she exclaimed, her voice full of warmth. "My goodness, get in here, both of you." We spent a few minutes catching up, her famous laugh just as loud and happy as I remembered. Then the conversation slowed, and I knew it was time. I took my mother's diary from my purse. "Eleanor," I started, my hands trembling just a little. "I came here for a reason. I found my mother's diaries. She wrote about you in them, and she wrote about her sister, my Aunt Catherine." As I said the name, Eleanor's warm smile faded. It was replaced by a look of deep, ancient sadness, a shadow passing over the sun. She knew exactly why I was here. Eleanor sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "I'm not surprised," she said, her voice soft. "Your mother was the only one who saw Catherine clearly, but no one would ever listen." And then she told us the story. She told us that the cruelty didn't start with my Aunt Catherine. It started with their mother, my grandmother. She was a cold and difficult woman who pitted her daughters against each other. She praised Catherine for being sharp and clever, which was her word for being manipulative. She called my mother weak because she was kind and honest. Catherine learned from a very young age that to get love and attention in that house you had to lie. You had to take what you wanted and then twist the story to make yourself look like the victim. The monster hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. It had been raised and trained right in the heart of our own family. "It was a sickness passed down from mother to daughter," Eleanor said, her eyes full of sorrow. "A poison. I'm just so glad to see that it seems to have finally stopped with you." We drove home as the sun set, painting the Ohio sky in shades of orange and purple. We were quiet for a long time, thinking about the sad old story we had just learned. "So, Diana," Tom finally said, breaking the silence. "She was just another version of Aunt Catherine, and Catherine was a version of her own mother." I nodded, looking out the window at the passing fields. "Yes," I said. "A chain." I realized then that when I fought for Michael, I wasn't just fighting Diana. I was fighting all the ghosts of my family. I was fighting a chain of cruelty that had been passed down for generations, strangling the kindness out of the women in my family. When we got home, the house was warm and smelled of the soup I had left simmering in the crock-pot. Michael ran to the door to hug us. I looked at him and at my son, and I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The monster's story was finally over. The chain was broken. Our family's legacy would no longer be one of secrets,